Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to another one of our wellness webinars, our free wellness webinars. Nice to see some familiar names here. Thank you for joining. For those of you joining live, thank you very much for coming today. If you are watching this in the recording, thanks for registering because that's how you can watch the recording. So I appreciate everybody being here. Just a couple little side notes before I begin. I'm in my main living room area instead of my back room where I usually do these. My cat is currently running around chasing things. Maybe he makes an appearance. Maybe he attacks me while I'm trying to speak. Who's to say? So I'll do my best to make sure I'm not flailing my hands about and giving him any ammunition. But thanks in advance if I have to pause the discussion. Let me begin here. For those of you who have joined before, you know what this is all about, but I'll make sure I go through and share some insight into what you're about to expect. Today, we are going to be discussing food allergies and intolerances, get you to understand a little bit more about the differences between the two things, especially if you or someone you know is managing this condition or not sure if you happen to have this condition. And obviously, if you want to give me a quick little thumbs up in the chat, if you can see and hear me okay. You can also put in where you're watching from. You can share with me where you're watching from. I am currently in New York City, downtown in Manhattan. A couple of housekeeping reminders here. We are recording this session, as you probably heard when you entered into the room. You can use the chat box at any time if you want to ask me any questions, but there will also be some time at the end of today's presentation where we can open it up for Q&A. You're more than welcome to keep your cameras off, especially since in about a month or two, these webinar recordings end up getting uploaded to my YouTube channel. So totally fine if you don't want to be seen on camera. This is not medical advice, even though I am a qualified healthcare professional. I am a registered dietitian, but as I always say, I'm not your registered dietitian. So please make sure that you are working with your own healthcare providers if you need to stop, take into account any food, nutrition modifications, physical activity, medicine, herbal remedies, supplements, etc. Please make sure you are checking first with your doctors who know you best. This is, you will get, I always say soon after, like within a day or two, but sometimes it takes me a week to get through and just trim and clip and upload the recording to the Dropbox account, where if you are watching this live, if you have to drop off or you miss any part of this, or if you're not watching this live, if you've signed up to receive the recording, then that will come in a separate email along with a follow-up survey. In that email, we always like to get feedback to see how we can do things better or differently, and also give you an opportunity to share with us any topics that you might be curious about, because even though at the beginning of every year I set up a weekly and monthly calendar of wellness topics, we sometimes don't get to touch upon really specific things, or we maybe miss a couple of things because there's only so much that I can do. I do manage quite a lot of these things on my own, but I also have the help of some nutrition students and dietetic interns who help me put together these presentations and gather topics and gather research on all this stuff. So we always love your input, and we really do appreciate your engagement, your interaction. So thank you for joining. So this is me while I'm talking a little bit about, yeah, there he is. There's my cat. So as I'm talking a little bit about myself, let's just check in the chat as to who chimed in. Oh, North Carolina, New York City. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for chiming in. Appreciate that. And I am a registered dietitian. Sometimes we're also known as nutritionists. If you haven't heard me saying this before, there is a difference. Nutritionists, at least depending on what state in which we live, nutritionists can be anything. They don't have to necessarily have gone through any kind of academic studies or taking any specific courses. In many states, you can call yourself a nutritionist just because you're interested in sharing nutrition information. But here in New York State and many states across the country, you cannot call yourself a registered dietitian unless you have taken the proper course credits. So we go through a whole Bachelor of Science, usually a Master of Science, definitely. We have to take what we have to apply to, get accepted into, and go through an entire year-long, very grueling, very competitive internship where we work with a variety of patient populations in a variety of settings, like healthcare settings, like hospitals, nursing homes. We also do community centers or public schools sometimes, depending on what our program teaches and has an emphasis in. So my journey took me, this was a second career for me. So my journey took me through a lot of hills and valleys, ups and downs, and I really have enjoyed the variety of things I've been able to gain experience in. So one of the things I do also is I'm an adjunct lecturer of nutrition studies, both undergraduate and graduate courses over at Lehman College, which is here in one of our city university schools. In the Bronx. That's where a lot of those of you who are joining, that's where a lot of you know me from. I also am the founder of Dish with Dina, which is an online virtual platform. That's kind of where I hold my private practice. So I do work with patients who get referred to me by doctors. I am starting to take a lot more health insurances because I think that's helpful and useful to be able to work with a healthcare provider if you don't have to pay out of pocket. I also was trained by the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, to do their type 2 prevention workshop. So I'm a trained, what they call a lifestyle coach with the Prevent Type 2 Diabetes workshop. That used to be a year-long workshop that I worked in with a couple of different community centers here in New York City. I have been very fortunate to be involved in some research studies as well. A lot of what we do, everything that we do as far as dietetics is concerned, comes from nutrition-based and evidence-based practices. So the information that I share with you in these webinars, while they're interesting to me, and I ask for your feedback on some things as to what we can talk about, we do pull from research articles and try to give you the most updated information when we create recommendations or guidelines or any kind of guidance that we're sharing with you. And then I'm also happy to say too, the longer I do this, the more I build up an expertise and I start thinking of myself as like qualified to talk about some things. If anybody's ever gone into whatever your profession is, you might suffer from imposter syndrome, and sometimes that happens to me too. But when I get to see people utilizing my information, calling me for quotes on things, seeing my name inside of magazines, journal articles, and websites and stuff, I just think that's kind of cool. You can also find me as Dish with Dina across many social media platforms. I'm probably most often on Instagram. I'm kind of on Threads. I'm definitely on LinkedIn and on YouTube as well. I do a lot of presentations and panel discussions too. For example, for anyone who's going to become a dietitian, if you're watching this, you might be heading to conferences and attending summits and seminars, and you might see me there. I'm going to be doing a virtual summit presentation tomorrow, which is kind of cool. And then, as I said too, a lot of the materials that you see here are based on a lot of work behind the scenes with some of my students, my nutrition students who volunteer every so often with me throughout the semesters. And I'm a preceptor, which is just a fancy term for saying a supervisor for people who are in the dietetic internship program. So this is before they become an official dietitian, before they take their national exam, but while they're in their internship rotations. They work with me and they work on things like this. So thanks again for joining. If you're here live, like I said, thank you for watching the recording. Thank you for watching the recording. All right, so let's get started with just giving some overviews. I have to shrink my little window here, so just bear with me a sec. There we go. Some overviews as to what the differences are when it comes to a food allergy and a food intolerance. So if you came into the gut health discussion, I think that was last month or a couple of months ago, we went through the whole process of what the gastrointestinal system does, how we eat and digest and metabolize food. So what happens is when you're taking in food through your mouth, it goes through this long tube that goes, I say, from mouth to south, right, in your mouth and out the rear end. So when you are working with a condition like allergies, you're going to notice that most of the symptoms are going to be usually limited to the upper half or the upper part of your gastrointestinal system. So in your mouth, your throat, possibly also affecting your respiratory, your lungs, your respiratory system too. And this is because, I'll explain in a second why that happens. This is because when we eat and we chew and we swallow, the issues that we have with the proteins that are found in certain foods is what is triggering this reaction. So the allergy reaction is what your immune system is doing. Your immune system contains a bunch of different things. The GI tract for sure, other cells in your body. Little guys come marching out and try to protect you because they think you're being attacked. Little guys being the cells in your body. They think you're being attacked by something and they're trying to react towards that. And because of that, this can be a fatal complications. So if you are not sure how to manage your allergy or you don't have the proper medicines with you at the time, you can suffer the consequences of not being able to breathe or choke to death, unfortunately. In the case of a food intolerance, this is something just more just along the lines of discomfort. Now, obviously, depending on your threshold of pain, it can span a spectrum of light discomfort, like, I have a gassy belly, or I feel a little bit bloated, to I have some kind of like abdominal cramping and I don't love it. And we'll talk a little bit more to in the slides to come with the symptoms that can happen there. But the thing to keep in mind is intolerances are sometimes known as sensitivities to food. The symptoms you find are going to happen more in the lower part of your gastrointestinal system. So more in the lower half of underneath your stomach, your small intestine, your large intestine. That's where you're going to feel the pain and suffering there. And as I mentioned with allergies, that is an immune system reaction towards the proteins found in food, whereas intolerances are usually an issue where your body cannot digest well, or it has some problems digesting the carbohydrates that are found in foods. And as we go towards the mid part and the end part of this presentation, you might recognize some of the language that we're using from some of the previous webinars that you've been on. But the thing to keep in mind is that intolerances are not nearly as fatal, having complications like that, as fatal as an allergy is. So here in front of you, you have a list of your top food allergens. We just welcomed in sesame back in April of 2021. Sesame made the top 9. Originally, it was just type 8. As I tell my students, this is not an easy list to remember. Unfortunately, there's no like mnemonic device that I've been able to find that helps me memorize these things, but I've trained myself to pretend like I'm going shopping in a grocery store. So I'll look through the list here and I'll say, okay, so milk and eggs, I'm usually finding over in the dairy or refrigerated section. And as I turn the corner in my grocery store, I might come across the meats section, and fish and shellfish would be included there. And maybe along the side panels of where I'm shopping, I'll see things like tree nuts and peanuts and sesame seeds. And then I'll have the bread aisle where there's wheat, and maybe there's soybeans somewhere along the line there too, maybe soy products, soy tofu, etc. So again, a little hard to kind of remember all of that, but you can see here that they're categorized, and some of the things that I think people get a little confused upon are the ones that are similar, like fish and shellfish are categorized together sometimes, and tree nuts and peanuts. Tree nuts are exactly that, things that you pull off a tree like an almond, versus peanuts, which are the legume family. They grow in the ground and you pull them out from the ground. All right, let's move along, and forgive me here for my little cursor showing because I'm trying to advance the slides. So one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting, maybe not for those of you who do suffer from allergies, but if you have a pollen or a seasonal allergy, it's possible that that can also show up in the form of a food allergy too. So some of these things are related because, again, as I just said, with the proteins found in your food sources, plants be plants, right? There are things that are part of the same kind of family in the botanical world. So if you happen to have an allergy in the birch family, birch trees or grasses or ragweed or mugwort, as some of the examples are given here, then as you can see corresponding below, it's possible you could also be dealing with an allergy, whether it's a light symptom or a large symptom reaction of the food products that you see listed there, like apples and oranges, etc. Same thing with latex again, right? The rubber tree plant. So latex is a plant-based material. You can find this in gloves and balloons and erasers and a variety of different plasticky type of things. So here too, there are correlations between latex allergies and possibly some food allergies. So now what I'm thinking you might need to know about this, right? If you have an allergy, you could maybe put together like, oh, that's why I'm itchy when I eat this thing, or that's why I have to be mindful of some other food items because I'm also dealing with the seasonal issue too. Or you might not realize that the seasonal issues, allergies have a correlation to food because food is maybe something you eat all the time, but the seasonal and the pollen things are something that happens only during the seasons, once a year or twice a year or whatever. If you are working in the healthcare world, this is something that you might want to take into consideration when you're speaking with your clients or patients, or if you happen to be a patient yourself, to make sure you're disclosing the allergies that you do have so that we as the healthcare providers can help you understand a little bit better about potential complications that can happen in the food world if you also are suffering from allergies in the plants, pollen, grasses, and the latex section of what I just explained. All right, so some of the allergies, like I mentioned before, your symptoms are usually going to be confined to the upper region of your gastrointestinal tract and also, unfortunately, in your respiratory system too. So your lungs, you could have trouble breathing. So as you see here, some of the symptoms include things like a tingling or an itchy tongue or mouth, swollen lips, shortness of breath, and maybe some rash or eczema on the face, on the neck, on the chest. This is your body's reaction again of kind of like fighting or attacking against what it thinks is being like an outside entity is it's attacking it. So it's trying to attack against that. In that small line that I have at the bottom there, the reason that this is, so this is like a chemistry, physiological discussion to share with you that the reason is because the proteins in the foods are broken down by digestive enzymes and acids that are normally found in the upper part of the gastrointestinal region. So once your food hits your stomach, that's where your proteins start getting things mashed up. This is protease. That is one of the enzymes that is known that helps break down a protein. So once the food's past the stomach, if you don't have an allergic reaction to it, you won't suffer the consequences. But if you do, then that might be a food intolerance. And we'll talk a little bit about that too, about the lower half of your gastrointestinal system. So again, allergy symptoms that you see here, because upper part of GI, it's reacting to the proteins that are being digested and broken down in that top half of the gastrointestinal system. Some of the treatments that you can see here, for sure, lifelong avoidance. And I'll talk a little bit too about how maybe sometimes allergies can come and go. But if you have been diagnosed with an allergy, I would highly, highly encourage you not to chance it, not to be like, well, my symptoms aren't that bad, so it's not that big of a deal. If you've seen me do some of these webinars, or if you happen to take a class with me, you know that I've said this before. The GI tract is very sensitive, and it also contains cells, epithelial cells, which have a high turnover rate. So, as an example, we have red blood cells through our system. So, if you take a blood test, your doctor might say, oh, you have high cholesterol, come back in 3 months because your red blood cells turn over about every 3 months or so. So, it's a whole new set of cells that we're looking at to get a new reading and a new lab value. When it comes to your gastrointestinal tract, your cells are turning over on a rate that's more around 5 to 7 days. So very, very quickly. And so the reason why I share with you to encourage or slash urge you to avoid your allergenic food item is because if you are allowing it to pass through your GI system and it is damaging some of those epithelial cells, those gastrointestinal cells that are in that tube that's, getting all the food and passing through it, even if you're not realizing you have any symptoms, your body is definitely recognizing there are issues at hand. And that damaged cell can replicate very quickly, again, within a week or so. And this is why we have a very high rate of things like esophageal and stomach cancer, because things are higher up in the body. And if you're not necessarily taking care of that, this also happens with drinking very, very hot liquids. So being careful with that too, because again, you might be damaging the cells. They turn over, replicate at a very high rate. And so you could potentially be causing cancer to occur in your body. Not to scare you, just to inform you and educate you to make the right choices. You can also potentially treat your allergy with a cooking method to cook your food. Some people, again, because of the protein in your food, that is what's triggering that allergic reaction. So if you happen to, as an example, be allergic to apples, if you're eating a raw apple and get that fuzzy taste or swollen tongue or whatever, you're breaking out in hives in some way when you eat a raw apple, you might not, if you might not get those symptoms or those reactions to happen if you are eating a cooked apple. So if you have applesauce or an apple pie, it might not be an issue. Just out of curiosity, for those of you who are in the science world, do you know why that is? Do you know what happens to a protein once you cook it? We've talked about this before in some of the other discussions, so feel free to put that in the chat, just a little quick pop quiz to test your knowledge, and I'll tell you as you're thinking about it, or if you want to look it up. So a protein is a molecule that folds in upon itself, and in the raw state, it holds its structure like that. When you heat it or put acid on it or something that changes the temperature or the environment in which that protein is holding its form, it unfolds and it becomes what's known as denatured. So it becomes a denatured protein. So again, this isn't necessarily true with everybody's allergy because again, you wouldn't be eating raw shrimp. you're eating cooked shrimp to begin with. So cooked shrimp is going to be cooked shrimp no matter what. But a raw apple or one of those fruit products or a vegetable product maybe might be a different symptom or no symptoms at all. So again, I would encourage you, if that's the case, if you want to kind of experiment with some of these things, to just discuss that with your doctor and maybe even bring that food in its raw form and in its cooked form with you to your next physician's visit, because if something does happen, then you have medicine available there to take care of whatever symptom is occurring. All right, so let's also take a look at some of the other treatments here. I just mentioned medications. Some of the things that you might be familiar with are things like the EpiPen, epinephrine pen, auto injector. So knowing how to use that, or knowing somebody is with you to be able to share with them, hey, I have an allergy. If something happens, click open this pen and jam it into my leg, my thigh, whatever, wherever you're going to need that injection. You'll also probably working with an allergist. This is somebody who specializes in the allergy world, and probably it would help you to work with a registered dietitian just to give you some support and guidance to do meal planning, or we'll talk a little bit too about when you're dining out, socializing, etc. Because having an allergy or having many allergies can be really complicated and challenging. So we want to make sure that you feel comfortable and safe with the foods that you're eating. So educating yourself or other people around your allergy. Also, as I said before, getting counseling on things too to help you manage if there are feel like it's very complicated or complex of what you're dealing with. And we'll talk about soon about advisory labeling, understanding where to look at when you are picking up foods that have labels on them, what you need to see. So I'll share that in a sec. All right, let's just compare this with top intolerances. So here you have a list of things that could hurt your belly a little bit. Again, not going to send you to the hospital, not going to kill you, but these are the top food intolerances. Lactose, you might know as milk sugar. You might know a lot of people. You might be one of those people yourself who is lactose intolerant. You might also have a gluten insensitivity. So gluten is one of these exceptions to the rule. Technically, that is a protein, but the rest of the things on here are kind of related to the carbohydrate family. So gluten is a protein found in wheat. If you have a gluten allergy that is known as celiac disease, that would be one of those things that would be fatal and you would have to avoid for life. And thank goodness nowadays we have a lot of gluten-free food items that are available in many of our supermarkets, and food manufacturers are all coming up with ways of making things gluten-free. So that could be something that you could check out if you have an allergy. If you have an intolerance to it, maybe you go gluten-free too. I would very much encourage you to work with a dietitian if that's the case, because we don't want you taking things out of your diet that are beneficial without replacing some sort of nutritional food item to make sure you're making up with whatever vitamins and minerals you could be missing. Caffeine is another intolerance too. It's a stimulant, so it can make your gut feel a little so obviously, if you have some caffeine intolerance, you stick with something decaffeinated coffee or herbal teas. So black tea, green tea, they have some amounts of caffeine, obviously, so does coffee. All right, salicylates. So I'm using my little cheat sheet here because I can't remember everything that I talked about on this list. Salicylates are chemical compounds found in aspirin, which is why sometimes we're told not to be on like a long-term regimen of aspirin because it can mess with your stomach. But it's also naturally found because, again, in the plant world, there's a lot of these things that we use in other forms and other ways, but naturally found in things like, it's a long list, like legumes, fruits, herbs and spices, watermelons, raspberries, etc. So as I'm sharing with you this list of foods, I want you to just be mindful to not get scared of anything. It's just, again, to share with you some information and education that if you're noticing some not great feelings when you're eating, it's possible you can give yourself a little test, and we'll talk about this in a second, of, when I eat this, I feel that. And maybe just keep a journal, a food log, something just to kind of see, what, I think this is the trigger food. This is what's making me feel not so great. But I'll also talk about in a second that by nature, food is supposed to do certain things when it goes through your body. And sometimes it does cause gas and bloating. So that's a natural occurrence. Anyway, it just depends on what your threshold is. How much of too much of anything could be an issue. Next on the list is amines. You might know of a histamine, right? So histamine reactions, like when you have colds or flus or some sort of, again, cut, whatever it is that your body's fighting against that. So an amine is a chemical compound that's naturally found in some processed foods like cheeses, chocolate, aged, pickled, smoked, canned, or dried fruits, meats, fish products, wine. The list goes on and on and on with this too. I mean, the list is extensive where amines are found. So this is where, again, I just try to say it's FYI to you of what these foods might contain, but I can only imagine that if you're suffering some sort of amin intolerance, there's a lot of foods that you're going to be scared of eating. And I understand, again, yes, but try not to get to the point where you become super obsessed with getting rid of everything, because then what is left? And if it's just a matter of feeling bloated or a little gassy, there are ways around that. We can, take a digestive enzyme, Beano, lactate, something like that, just to put your stomach or your GI system at ease so that you are able to eat the foods that are really, really nutrient dense and good for you. Next up on that list is FODMAPs. FODMAPs you heard about in the gut health conversation, that webinar I did, I think it was last month or 2 months ago. I keep forgetting. FODMAPs is an acronym, grammatically incorrect acronym if you ask me, but it's an acronym that basically just stands for sugars that break down in your gut. And that's all carbohydrates are essentially sugars that break down in your gut. So carbohydrates are things like fructose and glucose and lactose, et cetera, et cetera. So in the hierarchy of things that have high amounts of, the F stands for fermentable sugars. Actually, let me give you what the whole thing stands for. It's fermentable. And then ODM is oligo, meaning many, di, meaning two, and mono, meaning one, saccharide. So again, this just explaining the length of a sugar molecule. And then the A stands for and, ugh, I hate that that's in there. And then the P stands for polyols, which are just sugar alcohols that sometimes do occur naturally, but oftentimes are found in sweeteners that like, sugar-free gum and that sort of thing. So FODMAPs, as I said before, are just fermentable carbohydrates that are breaking down in your gut. They could be a little gassy, etc. But in the hierarchy of the foods that are listed on that, the things that contain high amounts of FODMAPs, fermentable sugars, are things like onions and garlic and apples and avocado, like all the good things we love cooking and making and eating. So again, if you're suffering the consequences of that, we'll share in a second with you how you might be able to manage that. And so you're not completely cutting things out. Next on the list, number 7, are things called sulfites. Sulfites are used as preservatives. So these are things that are found in usually alcoholic beverages like wine and beer, but also things like lemon juice or molasses or sauerkraut or sauces, fruit juices, shrimp, lobster, dough-based foods like biscuits, pies, and pizza crusts sometimes have sulfates on them. So you might see sometimes there are labels that'll say sulfite free. But as I tend to say, when a manufacturer removes one thing from the ingredient list, they sometimes put something else in there. So if you have a sulfite intolerance, you might want to shop for sulfite-free foods, but it's possible they're putting some other thing in there because the food item has to be shelf stable, or whatever other preservatives are being used in there, you could also be sensitive to. And the last on the list, I might actually do a whole webinar on artificial sweeteners because I get so many questions about them and they confuse me, to be perfectly honest. So the artificial sweeteners that I'm specifically talking about here are the chemically created, synthetically created substitutes that we use in place of sugar. So they're made in a lab. I mean, technically they could come from herbs as well, but not necessarily. Like some of them are made from natural substances like herbs. They tend to be about 200 to 700 times sweeter than sugar. Sometimes people who are managing blood sugar issues like type 2 or type 1 diabetes are sometimes told to eat or drink sugar-free products. And so artificial sweeteners would be found in those. But I tend to be like, don't do that. If you can eat the sugar, eat the sugar. Just be careful of how much sugar you're eating and in combination with what. Which again, I'll go into a different discussion in another webinar about sugar products and maybe even diabetes, etc. But for now, I'll share with you the brand names that might seem familiar to you. Things like NutraSweet, Equal, Sweet and Low, and Splenda. Those are the ones that come to mind. These are the brand name versions of aspartame, saccharin, and sucralose. And so again, the issue here is just because the artificial sweeteners are recognized by our body as artificial. The body's like, I don't know what to do with this, so I got to send it on its way. And so they end up, messing with your gut a little bit. And long-term use, so people who are constantly putting in packets and packets of Equal into their coffee or drinking tons and tons, gallons and gallons of diet soda, really can end up with massive amounts of gastrointestinal disruption, which I do not love, because if you remember anything from the gut health discussion, you need your gut. Your gut is really important. It's where your body makes vitamins, where your immune system is built. So we don't want to mess with that. We don't want to give you any problems with your gut. All right, let's move on to the symptoms that you might see if you're dealing with an intolerance. So things, again, right, the lower half, the lower part of your GI, so usually abdominal pain, bloating, gas, diarrhea, etc. Interestingly enough, but you might know the reason for this, sometimes anxiety and fatigue, because if you remember from the gut health discussion, or if I've ever talked about gut discussions, your gut and your brain talk to each other constantly. So if your gut, if your lower gastrointestinal area, your small intestine, your large intestine down here below your stomach in that lower region by your belly, if that is undergoing some pain and disruption, it's going to affect your brain because there's a communication line going on here. So that makes all the sense in the world to me. Now, as you see on the bottom there, much like I said about the proteins, this is because your carbohydrates, yes, they do tend to break down first in your mouth and they continue to break down as they travel in your esophagus, but they definitely end up in your small intestine where they break down and start fermenting, right? That's what's causing that gassiness to happen down there. So this is why you'll see those symptoms happen in the lower part of your gut. These treatments, you're not avoiding anything. Again, if you choose to avoid it, fine, but I really would encourage you to work with a dietitian if that's the case, because you could be denying yourself a lot of really good quality nutrition. But what usually happens is you would be working with somebody who is aware of how the gut works. So a GI specialist, like a gastroenterologist, or a GI specialist, like a GI dietitian. And then they might put you on an elimination reintroduction diet or a plan. So this is here where I often say could potentially end up causing or exacerbating an already existing eating disorder, because people do tend to get very afraid of what to eat, what not to eat. It takes a really long time to go and eliminate foods for whatever, 3 weeks, 3 months, and then reintroduce those foods one at a time. It could be really time consuming and very challenging because maybe you're not making food at home, right? You're not in charge of the food items that you're eating. So you don't know what ingredients are in the food when you're out to eat, or you don't know what's in the ingredients if you're ordering something, heat and eat from a supermarket or ordering some takeout. So now you're going through, does it have this? Does it have that? And again, I always err on the side of how much of too much of anything is an issue and how much of too much pain can you tolerate. Obviously, we don't want you double over cramping and having diarrhea all the live long day. But if it's just a matter of like, my pants feel tight, all right, well, undo your pants. Like, buy elastic band things. It's fine. That gassy feeling is going to go away soon. Walk around, drink some water, move around, get that body going, and within a handful of hours, you'll feel back to new again. But I understand it can feel uncomfortable. Here too is where I could recommend a digestive enzyme, like I mentioned before, Beano or lactate or whatever, and educating yourself and getting some counseling too to make sure that you don't feel challenged in having to manage this condition. All right, let me just move my little window out of the way. So here's an example of nutrition facts labels. Obviously, in the whole food world, whole foods meaning foods that are whole, not the supermarket, those things don't have labels on them. So you would have to know what, like milk, will be in a carton and it'll have a label on it, but a banana doesn't have a label on it. So you would have to know what you may or may not be allergic to or intolerant of. But my point is, on here on the left-hand side, you see a nutrition facts label in full with the ingredients on the bottom. On the right-hand side, there's a distinction where is listed the allergens that food has. So in United States, food manufacturers are mandated to disclose what food allergens are in their food items. And also, if they manufacture food in a facility where food allergens are made. So they could be making, some item that just happens to potentially be at risk to cross-contaminate in their food factory. So they have to disclose that as well. So I'm going to zoom in a little closer here, right on the right-hand side. You can see it says this product contains wheat, milk, egg, and soy. But if it's like a mom and pop shop or these like, farmers market vendors that they don't have the same kind of regulations that large food manufacturers have, or they might not even have labels on things, they might just put the ingredients in it. or they might not want to disclose a secret recipe. They might just have the, like I said, the ingredients, or they might tell you what the ingredients are. Here's where, again, it would be helpful for you to understand the language that's being used, so you can pull out, if it doesn't say there's a specific allergen in the food, you can kind of skim through and go, oh, there's wheat, there's whey. Whey is technically a protein found in milk products like animal milk. There's eggs, there's soy, and then you can make an informed decision about that. Look at that cute little baby. A fun fact, I think it's a fun fact. Research shows, and this is, this is something that I'm just gonna clarify here. Easier said than done, friends, because I know a lot of people with babies that shake their heads when I say this or get nervous about it, but I'll do some workarounds. A fun fact, research is showing that the sooner you introduce a baby to food allergens, the less likely they are to develop allergies in the future, and the less likely, or the less of a risk that they have from really developing a lot of different conditions down the line too, because we're helping strengthen their immune system. So if you know anything about babies, they come out immunocompromised, meaning that their gut, right? I said earlier, your gut, and when we talk about the gut, I'm technically talking about the lower small intestine area. There's a lot of stuff that's going on in there. So babies come fresh out of the oven, not ready, not fully cooked, right? So they have to develop that immune system. So as they get older, when they come off either the bottle, the formula, the breast or the chest milk, even at the age of around 4 to 6. So even if they're getting fed formula or breast milk up until, a year, 2 years, whatever it is down the road, we're starting to see that around 4 to 6 months is a great time to introduce what are known as complementary foods. A lot of times people just like mash up cereal or rice with breast milk or with water, and we'll feed that to the baby. But really, as long as it's not a choking hazard or anything too spicy, like we don't want to, give a baby like a hot pepper, obviously, but you can pull out things like peanuts or peanut butter or peanut powder or egg white, right? Mix up an egg white and chop it up really, really tiny, small, smash it up and give that a little tiny teaspoon to a baby and get them used to eating, to develop, again, building up their immune system and develop a tolerance towards those things that are allergenic. Now, the reason why this is sometimes a little tricky is, number one, a lot of daycares, a lot of elementary schools naturally just pull peanuts out of their menus anywhere. So it's a peanut-free environment. In doing so, you're obviously then denying people early exposure to that allergen. But I understand we don't want to take chances because we don't know who might be allergic, and it's a very large population. So, maybe just statistically speaking, only about 4 to 8% of children are officially diagnosed with a true food allergy, but you don't want to end up putting those kids in the hospital because you're like, there's peanuts in our cafeteria. So I get that. But at home or at the babysitter's or at grandma's house or whatever, I would definitely encourage making sure that you are giving your child as much a broad spectrum. Whatever you're eating, give it to them. Smash it up, make it smaller, and hand that over. We do have some resources about this, and let's see, if you follow me and my podcast, I think it's episode 31, Karen Mountjoy. You can look it up on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to things. If you listen to things, Karen Mountjoy, she is from New England, and she is a pediatric dietitian, and she talks exactly about this. So I understand for the parents at home might be a little concerned, like, I don't want to give this to my child and then they end up having a reaction to it. So what you do, just like I said earlier, is bring the stuff to your wellness visit. Go to the pediatrician's office and say, I'm ready to introduce my child to complementary foods. Would it be okay if I administered some peanut butter or some egg white that I cooked up at home, or I smashed a banana up? Like, let's just feed them and see what happens here. This way, in case anything happens, there's child's Benadryl, there's an EpiPen or whatever, and the doctor is sitting right there. Usually what will happen is you'll see a bit of a flushness on the face, but obviously more extreme cases, yes, that can be a respiratory issue. So I definitely want to say, I understand some of the apprehension around this or the concern around this because people don't want to harm their baby. But if you can do this early on, you really do set your child up for success and reduce the risk of them having issues later on in life, both in allergy world and also just regular conditions like chronic conditions down the line, because you're strengthening up that immune system at the earlier stages of life. Okay, the not so fun fact is, as I kind of alluded to earlier, adult onset allergies do occur. So do intolerances, because again, right, your gastrointestinal system is very sensitive. And as we naturally age, our gut, what they call the microbiome, right? Those good bacteria that are in our body that help us with building our immune systems can be affected through everything, whether or not you've had chemotherapy or many, many colds, or you've taken antibiotics a really long time, or you're on other kinds of medicines, or you live near a factory, or you live near a dairy farm, or whatever the case may be. So our body is very sensitive to the environment around it, but also the things that we put inside of it too. In the opposite end too, I don't necessarily see this with peanuts, but I have seen this with things like shrimp. Sometimes you could also lose the allergy over the course of time. So again, checking in with your doctor. If you're fully avoiding something, you want to get retested again. They do have allergy tests and skin prick tests and things that you would make sure you're working with a qualified medical provider. I have a little note on here too that I made for myself. Just be careful. Like there's reliable and unreliable ways to test yourself. I I don't love the send away things that you see on TV sometimes, or like mail order allergy tests. I just don't feel like they're properly tested. They don't go through a lot of regulations. Sometimes they're marketed through like supplement companies, and they might come back with like false information. So please make sure you're talking to your qualified healthcare provider to run a reliable blood or skin test for certain allergies or intolerances. But anyway, I thought this would be interesting to share. Just like pollen and seasonal things, things can come and go. It just depends on what our body feels like doing that particular day or year or decade. All right, some cooking tips. If you are dealing with a food allergy or intolerance, as I just shared with you a few slides ago, make sure that you are reading food labels properly so you know how to identify those allergens. In the case of somebody who is also immunocompromised, so by nature, young children, older adults, people living with HIV, or people who are currently either living with cancer or managing cancer through chemotherapy, you might want to also separate some utensils and use different cutting boards. So for those of you who are in school for nutrition, you might have a food lab where you do this already. Or if you work in a commercial kitchen or you're in food service, there's definitely rules and regulations about, only using gloves a certain amount of times, trying not to cross-contaminate things, using color-coded equipment, like raw meat goes on here, but raw vegetables go on there. So you're not accidentally cross-contaminating, not just for foodborne illness purposes, but also cross-contaminating with known allergens. And experimenting with allergy-friendly recipes from trusty sources. Kids, we live in the future, right? You know this. You can Google everything. You could have a very, very rare disease, and there's probably a support group out there on Facebook that also has that same rare disease. So I highly recommend, especially since a lot of doctors, physicians, even dietitians, sometimes we don't get a chance to spend an hour with you when you come to see us. And so we might send you off on your way, like, here's some resources and look some stuff up. So what I tend to do is I quickly will Google certain like allergy friendly things. In New York City, we actually have a website that collects allergy friendly restaurants. And that's a great, like, it's free, right? It's a database that you can just look up online and you feel safe going there. Same thing with, like I said, different websites, or even on Instagram, there might be like an allergy friendly mom who has recipes available. So if you are yourself working with an allergy or an intolerance, or you have a child or someone in your family who is also working with this, we really want to take away that stress from having to eat well and eat safely and give you as many resources as possible. Dining tips. Yeah, be that person, be the person that calls ahead. I will say, right, I know people don't love to be the person who, when they're at the table ready to order, that they're like, does this contain cashews? Is it made in oil that contains cashews? Are there cashews in the facility or in the establishment? So I would very much encourage that you don't hold up the whole table from placing the order and or not wanting to dine with you anymore. Call in advance and say, can you accommodate something? Or if you're at a venue like a catering hall, like you're going to a wedding or you're going to someone else's house, you can say, would it be all right if I brought my own thing? Or do you have allergy-free foods? Can I see the menu ahead of time? Can you just let me know what's there? So when I get there, I know exactly what I can eat, what I feel safe with, or that they can accommodate any customized requests. Choosing simpler dishes. So again, what you see on screen here, like things with pastas, with sauces, you might not know what's in the sauce, but if you're just getting a salad with dressing on the side, then you can maybe doctor some things up on your own so that there's no confusion or you're not taking a chance in whatever the allergy might be in there. especially if you're allergic, like there are things that are going to cause you to die or send you to the hospital, get an allergy card from your allergist or make one up on your own if you want to. Put it in your wallet, especially if you are traveling or dining out, so that in case something happens or in case EMT is called or first aid responders come, they usually go through your wallet to see, or like if you have an allergy bracelet, to see if you have anything that they need to be aware of when they are administering help to you. And then here we have specialized dietary plans. Again, you know I'm always going to advocate for the value of a dietitian, whether or not your doctor tends to refer you to one without you asking. I highly recommend just reaching out and seeing, even if it's just a couple of times that you meet with them, just say, I was recently diagnosed with a trigger food, or my kid has an allergy and I'm not sure what to do or where to go. We're happy to provide you with resources and to provide you with materials and give you some guidance so that you're not by yourself. You're not on your own. You have a good group of people in what is known as your interdisciplinary team, healthcare professionals. So making sure that you are also, as I said earlier, meeting your nutritional needs. So if you end up getting rid of things like eggs contain things like choline and good quality protein and other kinds of vitamins and nutrients. So we want to make sure, what else do you have to eat in order to get what's missing? It also is a caloric thing too. So if you're getting rid of some food groups, then okay, are you meeting your caloric needs for the day, or are you like running on empty? Are you finding yourself super fatigued because you didn't eat enough because you have so few things to choose from? So we can help with, meandering through and giving you some guidance on how to create substitutes or utilize things that might be on the safe list in different ways, so you're not getting bored eating the same thing over and over and over again. As you can see here, some suggestions are things like focusing on more whole foods, that you know what's in something. Obviously, you being in charge of stuff, assuming you have access to quality food, a kitchen, resources in which you can make these things. So again, we can help, dietitians and other healthcare providers can help put you in touch with places that could help you with resources too, case managers, etc. And or considering alternative ingredients. I mean, I would hope that if you are allergic to shrimp or nuts, that if something calls for a recipe with those things in it, you're not going to do that. Like, you're going to substitute it for like chicken or a different kind of fish, right? Not shellfish, but a different kind of fish, or tofu or something else, a different kind of protein, so that you're not, again, you're not missing the flavor, the enjoyment factor of eating that food just because it has a particular item that you might be allergic to. Friends, this is the time of the presentation where I ask you to think about, if you feel like sharing in the chat, you can, but you don't have to if you don't want to. What are some of the things that you have currently been dealing with? What are some takeaways from this discussion? What are the next steps for you? So if you're managing an allergy or an intolerance, could you maybe create a little food log for yourself, or look for alternate sources for recipes, or ask to speak with a dietitian just to give you some support and some guidance if you are finding some trouble or some challenges in creating a meal plan that is going to help support you both nutritionally and in the foods that you enjoy eating. Are there things that you have been ignoring? Like if you do have a food intolerance or an allergy that you're like, oh, it's not a big deal. I can deal with that stuff. If it's gotten to the point where your threshold, and again, especially in an allergy case, you're looking at lifelong avoidance of something that you are legitimately allergic to, of coming to terms with, I might not be able to eat this food ever again, but let's find out what else I can eat that could substitute, both maybe in flavor and in caloric quality and in nutritional density as well, nutritional needs too. And that brings me to my last slide. I think I'm good on time, right? We have about 10 minutes or so left. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, chuck them in the chat. You can also connect with me online. I am on LinkedIn. You can see there my social media name is Dish with Dina, pretty much everywhere. And as I said too, I'm doing a lot of these webinars that if you are not registered for, you completely miss, and you don't get the recording in a future date. You can or in a previous date too. You can always check on my YouTube channel, because we upload those a couple months after they that I officially present them. My website is dishwithdina.com. On there, you can sign up for my mailing list. There's also information on how to book a nutritional consultation with me. I usually do a little 15-minute check-in with people that are looking to work with me as their dietitian to make sure I can meet whatever their needs are, because sometimes I don't feel comfortable with certain conditions or I'm not qualified for certain things. So I want to make sure I'm right for you. And also to double check if I take your insurance or not. You can always find that information out on my website. Keep in touch however you can. Let me take a sec to check in the chat if there's anything in here. Okay, Thalita, let's see. My daughter, 1 year, 6 months, has gases related to snoring. Yeah, I would say I mean, first of all, I'm always going to err on the side of if it feels extreme, especially at that age, there could be some underlying issue, but I usually try to say go with the simplest answer first before you get really worried and like have to do an endoscopy or something, especially on a child that young before you have to go to your doctor. So I would say maybe just see if there's a pattern, right? When she eats this, this happens. And if it's just a gassy feeling, then as I mentioned earlier, just by nature, the good foods that we eat, the good quality foods that we eat, the produce items, the fruits, the vegetables, beans, rice, etc., when we eat, chew, swallow, and they go down into the lower part of our gastrointestinal system, just by nature, they're breaking down and marching off. I mean, does that make any sense, right? I'm trying to visually think of a molecule breaking down and marching off into the direction as to where they need to go. This one has to go to the muscle. This one's going to the kidney. This one's going into the blood. So they're doing different things in that gut. And so it's going to be natural that gases can occur. But if she's having trouble like passing gas, if she's having trouble going to the bathroom, whether she's at that age, I'm assuming, right, she's toilet trained, so she's going to the toilet. If there's issues like that, or if it's coming back up and she's finding herself feeling kind of nauseous or there's vomiting involved, if it's a severe type of abdominal cramping, like a lot of pain versus just like, a little bubble in your gut, then I would say if it feels somewhat severe, then obviously make sure that you're going to the doctor just to get her checked. But you can just test things out. Like maybe she ate a lot of like, gassy types of foods. Maybe make sure you mix and match some things if she's open to having a more varied diet. And if you have the ability to test out some things, maybe some things that she can deal with and other things she cannot. But usually a gassy gut is not going to like kill you. That's always a good thing to just keep in mind, usually. All right, let's take a look. Yeah, exactly, exactly. And listen, it's not something that we're comfortable with, but it's a natural thing. I wish it came out different. I wish it was like it comes out through and it smells like flowers. Like I wish that we would feel more comfortable with it. But yeah, that's just how our body naturally digests. Sometimes we burp, sometimes we fart. It's just natural part of digestion. Um, Drinking water too, so making sure she stays hydrated and also, I mean, this is just for anybody's benefit too. Hydration, because fibrous foods can often constipate us. So we want to make sure when we're eating a lot of good quality fruits and vegetables, especially things like beans, lentils, legumes, that we're also drinking enough water through the day or whatever type of fluid, soups, stews, teas. I mean, coffee too, but coffee is in itself, like I said, a stimulant. So I wouldn't necessarily say that would make your gut feel better. So making sure, and especially for a baby, I wouldn't give coffee to a baby, but like, making sure they're drinking enough water as well through the day. And the third, right? So one is checking and tracking the food that you could be eating that's causing an issue. Two, keeping hydrated with fluids throughout the day. And three, staying mobile. So every time you eat, take a little 5-minute lap, like get up, do the dishes, go walk around, march around, get that body kind of like shaken up a little bit because it really does help with a few things. It helps with mobility and motility of helping with your digestive system. And it also helps with managing your blood sugar. So again, it just helps with getting that insulin to where it needs to go while we eat. Our sugar naturally goes up, our blood sugar naturally goes up, and our insulin helps calm it down, bring it down a little bit. So just getting up and moving around. When we were kids, only after dinner, not obviously during school, we didn't do this, but during school, we had like recess, right? We'd go outside and play outside and run around. So that was keeping us active. And at home, after dinner, because this is a very Italian thing to do, maybe some of you who also come from different parts of the world used to do this as a tradition as well, but we would go for a walk after dinner. We'd just take a walk around a couple of blocks, stop and say hello to my aunt who lived down the street, say hello to some neighbors, maybe go take a walk in the park around the block and then come home. So it was just a way for us to digest and chat and move around and get that motility going. I appreciate your question. Thank you, Thalita. And anyone else, if you have anything else to share, I have a couple more minutes before we officially wrap up. You're welcome, my dear. Again, thanks so much for coming, everybody. I hope that these are interesting to you. I'll keep doing them as long as you keep showing up and giving me feedback that this is informative. Again, I do it for the sake of having you feel more empowered and educated and able to make those informed decisions for yourself, but also to know what to take with you when you go to your doctor's offices. Because I get that not every doctor, well, doctors just don't know about food. Let's just say that. Sometimes they'll hand you a list and be like, don't eat these things, stop eating fried stuff. No, you're allowed to do certain things. Come to a dietitian instead. We're the experts with food and nutrition, but also not every healthcare provider can spend hours and hours with you, really getting into all those nuances and talking about resources, et cetera. So the more you know, the more you get to take with you and feel like you're a more informed, empowered patient. You're welcome. Thanks. Thank you, Latrice. Nice to see you here, hon. All right, everybody. Thanks you, Johanna. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. You'll get an email within the next 1 to 7 days with the link to this and the link to the survey to give some feedback on this. Have a great one, everyone. Bye.